Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with a pretty interesting set. So not long ago, I actually had reviewed some dinosaur figures. They were from a brand called King Me World, and they were articulated dinosaurs. Well, on AliExpress, they also had those same figures, but without articulation, and I've been considering grabbing them for quite a little while, but I didn't. There's also extra species that we didn't have in the articulated versions, like Spinosaurus and stuff, but I did not actually place an order for any of them because each one was like $6 or $7, something like maybe like $5 or $6, I think they were. So over time, that would have definitely added up to be a pretty hefty price tag. However, I recently was checking out Amazon and noticed that they had this set on there, which is basically those same figures, the non-articulated versions, and all in one set for, I think it was like 20 bucks. So it wasn't really the greatest deal because these are probably going to be super cheap, awful figures. But at the same time, to be able to, get them all for that price was definitely, in my opinion, a pretty good deal. At the same time, I feel like they might not be quite as high quality or even maybe not as large as the ones on AliExpress because those ones seem to have different paint apps which are a bit more high quality. So these may be more of like the minifigure versions of them, but at least I'll have a chance to check out the sculpts and stuff of them here to see if maybe it's worth purchasing the more high quality versions, which I don't even think those would be high quality either, but at least maybe even a little more high quality than these. But you can see this is the Dinosaur Park Exploration set, and we can obviously see on top of that we've got a ton of different figures here on the front. As we turn to the side, we have a nice shot of the easy to carry with dinosaur cage. And then on the back, you have some random information that now, because of the way that the box is, it's kind of upside down. Over here on the side, you have another shot here of the dinosaurs, and apparently you can create your own dinosaur world with the map. And then here on the back, we actually have an image basically showing off all of the different dinosaurs that are included in here, all of the different species that are included in here. So pretty interesting. So let's go ahead, pop this box open, and check it out. So here is our cage. And let's go ahead and just readjust this slightly to get a better view of this. But you can see it does come with a pretty cool cage. And I think as far as playability goes, this aspect to the set is pretty fun because if you were to, first of all, you can keep obviously all of the dinosaurs in the cage so that you can store them. But also, again, it's actually pretty neat way to potentially display them, or even other figures if you happen to have other figures that could fit in the cage. It's a pretty neat way to display them because the cage does look fairly cool. So once we pop the cage open, we open the top, and that now shows us everything that is contained within. So we'll just put everything over here to the side and we'll bring all the different pieces in. First of all, we have some trees, and the trees are actually kind of cool. I mean, they're not really great. You can obviously see they're fairly cheap looking, but when I read the description for the box and it said that there were going to be trees included, I just kind of expected them to be even cheaper than this. So these ones are kind of fun for what they are. Well, now they probably won't stand. Not really. Not well. No, that one's down. Oh, there we go. That one's standing. And as we can see, we have quite a few trees that are included. So you've got kind of almost like palm trees here. Very tropical looking vegetation basically for your dinosaurs. That one's not going to stand, I can tell you that much right off the bat because it's leaning, and there it goes. So at least you have some pretty cool trees that can help to give you somewhat of a prehistoric landscape. And then of course, species wise, we have a pteranodon in here that my camera just decided it didn't want to focus on. The beak is severely warped. If it wasn't, I feel like it wouldn't be half bad looking overall. We do also have a Dilophosaurus in here, as well as the Carnotaurus, which of course I'm excited about, which does look nicer in person than I was expecting it to. Still not great, but like the detail, the actual scale detail looks pretty darn nice on that, which is kind of enticing me to potentially pick up the other version of that. But you can see again, we have an Ankylosaurus as well, and that one just fell over. This one is said to be the Giganotosaurus, which is purple, so it's apparently a Barney Giganotosaurus. And now that one fell over, and that one is not going to stand apparently right now. We also have the Stegosaurus in here, which I actually kind of like the colors of that one, as well as the Tyrannosaurus, potentially, is what this one is supposed to be. And the Velociraptor, which is one of the weirder looking interpretations of a Velociraptor I've seen, but I will say that this version looks better than the articulated one did as far as the overall sculpt goes. We also have a Brachiosaurus, which is actually kind of decent, and then a Triceratops, as well as, boy, there's a whole lot to get through in this set, a Spinosaurus, which at first I thought might be a collectee bootleg, but I actually don't think so. I think that might be its own individual figure that I've never seen before, which is kind of cool. And then we also have a T-Rex, which is actually a pretty darn big T-Rex. And it kind of makes me wonder if maybe the ones that I've seen on AliExpress are more like this size potentially, and they're just larger versions, which actually would make them a lot more appealing, I think, because sculpt-wise, it's actually kind of a cool T-Rex. Not really, an accurate one or anything by any means, but kind of cool. And then you also have this giant map thing in here, which is basically, you can see, it's just kind of like a little floor pad sort of thing that has an interesting but very cheap looking, I guess, map on it. Doesn't really look that great. I honestly don't know if I'm going to mess with it too much, but we'll see as we go on with the video. And now we'll just take a quick look at the figures. Again, a fairly quick look overall. Here's the Ankylosaurus, which we can see. Again, the detailing looks fairly decent overall. It's not that great, and there is a lot of this I've noticed going on with these figures as we've gone through them. There's like, I guess, glue or something where the figures have been connected, which has given them all a very kind of glossy look, which is not very good at all, but it looks okay as far as the detail goes. This one is basically a grayish coloration, and then there's like a dry brushing, a really sloppy dry brushing that moves through the course of the figure in an attempt to sort of highlight all of the detail. You have a very strong curve to the tail, also an exceptionally long tail for an Ankylosaurus. Like, that tail is so long, and overall, it's definitely not the greatest looking Ankylosaurus. It's actually one of the weirder looking ones that I've seen, as far as the fact that that tail is so long, but it's not the ugliest figure, that's for sure. We do have a blue, and then a red, and then a black for the eye right there that my camera doesn't want to focus on, so you can see that. But you can also take notice of the fact that the paintwork is a little bit sloppy in that area as well. I think these figures, the detail is so decent on them that they would actually be fairly fun to repaint. Like, you could probably get some decent looking figures out of these if they were repainted to look more realistic. You also have a little extra plastic right there. The paint apps that are on them currently, not so great, but they could be better. Let's move these trees out of here, because those trees are definitely a distraction for my camera. We also have the Dilophosaurus, which you can see. Again, the detail is shockingly fairly crisp on some of these, even in the face here of the Dilophosaurus. When you get nice and close, you can see some pretty decent scale detail and stuff. It's just that the paintwork that's on these looks, atrocious, honestly. Like, the paintwork of the teeth is so sloppy. You have so much paint there around the eye, like a massive glob of orange paint, and then a black that's, I guess, meant to be the pupil, and then more super sloppy paintwork for the teeth. But if you really took the time out to actually paint these, I feel like they could look pretty decent. This one is obviously very Jurassic Parkish, but the frill is super strange looking as far as being a JP style Dilophosaurus. Like, the fact that it has a frill makes it Jurassic Parkish, but the frill is very different from the way you would see a Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus. As you move down through the body, again, the skin texture is surprisingly really crisp, and overall the figure is quite highly detailed, especially for being like one of these random off-brand figures. Like, it is really impressive when it comes to the fine detail. You've got a really long neck for the Dilophosaurus. You also have a dark green color for the figure overall, and then a little area here of like this yellowish striping, but it doesn't last very long before it's gone. You also have an orange here in the frill, which is fairly cool as well. But you can see, again, the detailing over here on this side also looks shockingly nice, which kind of makes me wonder if the ones on AliExpress, the, I guess, larger ones, are as nicely detailed as these. These, again, like I said, I would actually not mind repainting these if there weren't so many. We also have the Velociraptor, which the Velociraptor definitely has a Jurassic Park look to it. It's obviously a scaly raptor. I actually quite like the colors of the raptor as well, as it has kind of like a slight bluish green color, and then this very interesting like red orange that moves along the back and kind of stripes down, and you can also see it up here on the top of the head. I think that looks pretty cool. The teeth again look pretty terrible. The paintwork of the eye is also not good, but the figure is absolutely not lacking when it comes to fine detail. Again, like when you get nice and close, you can really see how impressive the skin texture is on these figures. Like, they are very sloppy, very amateur when it comes to the paint, but quite nicely detailed as a whole. As you move down, you could see that through the figure. The nails are big and bulky, so that area would look pretty ugly, but like as you move down, you can even see like the rib cage and stuff in the stomach region. The skin texture again is very impressive, and as you move down, you can see the sickle claws for the raptor. We do, of course, have dew claws as well. Just super lackluster paintwork as a whole, but the figure does look fairly fun for what it is. A very inaccurate raptor, but fairly fun. We also have the Stegosaurus, which again, like detail-wise, is fairly decent. I actually really like the colors of this one, but it just needs more, and specifically in the face, it definitely needs more. Like, the beak should be painted. The eyes are horrible as far as the paintwork. Like, they did not even attempt to paint those eyes in a nice way. But the detailing looks good. The tones of color on this one are pretty fun. I feel like if you had some sort of a wash applied to this, it would really amp up the detail quite nicely. Obviously, the Stegosaurus is in a bit of an action pose here, kind of like walking along. But I am actually super impressed with how good the detail on these looks. I was not prepared for them to look half as nice as far as the fine detail goes as these do. Like, even up here in the plates, those plates are pretty highly detailed throughout. And you've got a nice curve to the tail as you lead out to the Thagamizers. It could be a pretty decent version of a Stegosaurus. Again, if given a repaint, a little bit of a higher quality look, or even just adding on to the paintwork that we have here, keeping this color scheme, but just adding on to it with like a wash and some more little touch-ups like the Thagamizers being painted, the beak, the inside of the mouth, new paint for the eyes and stuff like that, and maybe a different tone, or even a little bit extra to the plates. You know, you could turn this into a fairly decent version of a Stegosaurus. You as well have the Triceratops, which isn't terrible, kind of goofy looking, but not terrible. It has a very cheap look to it, but at the same time a very highly detailed look. As you move through the body, like, you could see some larger clusters of scales, as well as some different style skin texture. You've got more larger clusters up there. Obviously, whoever sculpted these figures originally definitely spent some significant time on them to make them look pretty good. This one also has a really interesting color scheme with a red for the primary body, kind of like a red-orange for the primary body color, and then some brown. And I will say the brown moving here through the frill is surprisingly nicely applied, and also does give it kind of a cool, you know, I would say fairly natural look. And we also have more of that brown following along the spinal column. Obviously, the color is super lacking on these things. Like, you don't have paintwork, it seems, leading into the tails on pretty much any of them from what I've seen so far. And then there's only really like 2 different variations of color applied to the majority of the figures, with the Dilophosaurus being the exception, as it has a little extra color in the frill. But you do have the paintwork of the eyes fairly nicely done on this one, as we have a black and then a white spot to sort of give it the eye shine. Even that eye is actually nicely done. This one, again, would be an interesting one to just apply like a wash to, and then maybe just a few areas of like extra paint, like the horns, the beak, the inside of the mouth, the nails. And again, it could come to life pretty nicely. But just like with the others, like, I'm quite impressed with how impressive the fine detail is. The other thing that's a little bit iffy about these figures is they all have a seam. Obviously, they were 2 parts, and this one has a really awkward seam. So maybe you'd need to cover those seams up to really complete the look of turning this from a cheap dinosaur toy to a fairly kind of high quality figure. You would definitely have a little bit of work cut out for you. We've also got the Tyrannosaurus, or what is said to be a Tyrannosaurus, but doesn't look very much like one to me. But you've got an interesting head sculpt here. You kind of have a beak for the dinosaur. We can see the teeth inside the mouth, but there's no paintwork in there. We have a green for the eye, and then a black. Super sloppy, super huge paintwork there for the eye. Primarily, we have a brown tone for the body of this one, and then you have like these little splotches throughout the course of the body where it's like an orange, and then it's kind of outlined with a black. So at least this one has a little bit more effort as far as the coloration goes. The skin texture, again, looks really impressive on this figure, though, as they all really have through the entire line so far. You've got the muscle definition nicely shown off in the figure. You can see some feathers leading off of the back of the elbow right there, which is pretty cool. And again, the same thing over here. This almost looks like if you took like a Struthiomimus and mated it with a Tyrannosaur of some species, and now this is what you end up with. The nails actually look a little bit nicer on the feet on this one than some of the others, but you do also have another little area of plumage out here at the end of the tail, which is pretty cool. And again, even the feathers are actually fairly nicely sculpted, which is quite surprising. We do have those big long Tyrannosaur nails here for the hands of the dinosaur as well, but overall it's certainly not the best Tyrannosaurus that I've seen, but still kind of fun. We've also got our Giganotosaurus, and as you can see, it's a fairly interesting looking figure. Very interesting as far as the color choice on this one, as we have a purple for the primary body color. The teeth again are super sloppy as far as the paintwork, but if they actually took some time out to paint the teeth rather than just kind of run some paint through that area, it could have turned out okay. The eyes are a white and then a black pupil, and that also looks super sloppy. But again, when we get nice and close, you can really, I think, appreciate how impressive the detailing of these figures is. Same deal for the Giga. Like, you could see different variations to the sizes of the scales and stuff throughout. You also have some ridges following along the back. Pretty interesting ridges. I don't know if I'd quite say Jurassic World Dominion-like, but it almost seems like maybe they had a little inspiration from that. But moving down, you have some black that just basically runs along the back and then stripes through certain areas of the body. But even leading into the body, like, look at how good that skin texture looks. I am so impressed with the fine detail of these figures. Really back here as you move into the thigh, but like that detail pops. It looks so much nicer than I was ever expecting it to. Unfortunately, this one, as you can see, is definitely quite warped. The leg has been bent in, so I would need to fix that area. The dinosaurs are also really quite thin overall. I would say all of them have kind of like a little bit too skinny of a body. Like, this Giga is super, super thin, as pretty much all of them have been so far. We've got an okay looking arm sculpt moving down, and then you've got the tail kind of down near the ground. I don't know if I'd say it's quite dragging on the ground, so it's not necessarily in a tripod pose. The tip looks like it would probably be touching. But the paintwork of the back actually runs pretty far on this one. As you can see, it does lead out into the tail. Not all the way, but at least a little ways down. It's also got a pretty lengthy tail to it, which is a plus for this figure. And again, the detail looks super crisp if my camera focuses. There we go, super crisp on this side, even moving down into the feet. Like, it is really well done when it comes to the detailing aspect. These would be great figures to repaint, like to work on. If you are new to painting, if I were to recommend you pick some stuff up to kind of practice your paint jobs on, these would definitely be great choices, because the detail is so impressive on these figures. It would be, I think, very helpful if you were new to repainting to practice on these figures. The Brachiosaurus as well, again, is pretty decently done. I feel like if that paintwork weren't so sloppy up there in the face, the head sculpt wouldn't look half bad. This would be kind of like a decent interpretation of a JP style Brachiosaurus. Moving down through the body, again, the skin texture is very impressive. You've got a striping effect following along the back of the body that leads out into the tail a little ways. Kind of starts to go off course here as you lead further into the tail. The Brachiosaurus, though, does have another one of these super awkward seams, and this one is, like, honestly, it stands out like a sore thumb, similar to what one had this as well. The Triceratops, I think, had this same spot where it had this kind of seam right here, which is really ugly. But if you were to, again, seal up that seam, even if you didn't, if you just painted it yourself without sealing the seam, I feel like it still wouldn't look too bad. But I would recommend kind of sealing that up, and again, then getting to work on the repainting process, because that detail is so nice on this figure. The Nails and everything are sculpted out fairly decently on the figure. The muscle definition is sculpted out quite nicely throughout. You've got a pretty long tail as you lead down here into the tail of the Brachiosaurus. Nice green color for this one. I actually like the tones of color for this, and I like that it's not overly flashy, like you wouldn't expect so much color on a sauropod. Even the underside's really nicely done. Man, again, these are really impressing me. It's just unfortunate that whoever created them didn't care so much. And now we have the Spinosaurus, and the Spinosaurus as well obviously has a bit of an exaggerated look, a kind of a goofy look with some weird ridges moving along the back and stuff, but it still looks kind of fun. And again, with a repaint, definitely needing a repaint here, especially with the teeth and then the eye paint, very sloppy. We have a brown coloration for the Spinosaurus, and as you move back, you again have impressive skin texture throughout, all sorts of very nice fine detail, wrinkles and folds and stuff moving along. The sail looks pretty cool as we have a little variation of color with some yellows and some oranges up here. Again, kind of like a scoot-like appearance to the scales moving up. You also have the ugly seam returning again, just like we had in the Triceratops and Brachiosaurus, where it's like in the most obnoxious spot possible right here, and it's not even nicely applied. The glue is everywhere, so it's got like that super shiny look following along all over the place on the underside. And then same deal when you come over here. But again, if you were to repaint it, maybe you could make that look a little bit better. Of course, make that all disappear. You've got a different look here from the other side of the head sculpt. And this one is obviously more of a quadrupedal Spinosaurus, so a bit outdated, unless you look at it as being a swimming Spino, because it does kind of look like it's got the arm in the position of potentially swimming, but at the same time, the rear legs look like they're walking, as does this one. So it's a little confusing. Maybe it's just kind of like heading down into the water. I'm not too sure. But as you lead out, you do actually have a paddle tail for the Spinosaurus as well, which is pretty cool. And again, the skin texture still looks incredible, honestly, on these figures. I'm super shocked at how good the detail. I was not prepared for how good the detail was going to look on these figures. And it's sad that this kind of impressive detail didn't translate to the articulated versions that I got. They didn't, unfortunately, have an articulated version of their Spinosaurus, which, looking at that now, they really should have. But moving along, we as well have the Pteranodon, which again has a warped beak here for the lower jaw, so that's unfortunate. It also has a reddish tone for the primary body color. You've got like a black striping moving down the beak and then more black back here into the face. You've also got a yellow eye with a black pupil. Again, more super sloppy paintwork. It's obviously sculpted with its mouth in an open position. And then as you move back into the body, again, here we go. The detail looking honestly incredible. As you lead back here, you can kind of make out the spinal column. The skin leading out into the flaps, like the skin flaps of the wings, is super impressive here. It looks very nicely done. We also have some black that kind of leads out and patterns through the wings as well, which looks pretty cool. You can see the feet are even nicely sculpted on the underside. And moving to the underbelly of the Pteranodon, we can kind of make out the rib cage. More super impressive fine detail. You can even see like veins and stuff throughout the wings, which is, again, shocking to me how good these figures look when it comes to the fine detail. Like, they all have kind of a weird, goofy sort of look to them, but very impressive detail throughout. We do also have the Carnotaurus, which I was most excited about, and it's definitely, again, kind of goofy looking. Like, the placement of the horns isn't quite where it should be. The head's a bit longer and a little bit silly looking overall, but it does still have very nice fine detail to it throughout. You can see the skin texture in the face looks incredible, honestly. You also have the teeth painted a little bit better on this one, but still, I would have preferred each tooth painted out individually as opposed to what we have here, but that's not something you're going to get for a cheap set like this. We do as well have a yellow coloration that follows along the back of the dinosaur, kind of like almost like an armored sort of scoot-like appearance following along the spinal column of the Carnotaurus. One thing I'm surprised to see is we don't actually have, well, maybe we do. It's more like a scoot-like appearance following along the back as opposed to osteoderms following through the body, which is what you usually see for Carnotaurus. So that's kind of surprising to me. But obviously this one has its mouth sculpted in an open position. We can see the tongue sticking up in there, and it's actually painted with a reddish tone. And again, we have a brown for the primary body color. Leading along, the skin texture continues to look super impressive on this one as well. All sorts of variation to the sizes of the scales and stuff. More of that that sloppy glue all over the place again, right there in the midsection, unfortunately. The Carnotaurus has a pretty cool pose to it as well, as it's just kind of like, looks like it's roaring up into the air or something like that. But again, pretty darn impressive. Fine detail on somewhat of a goofy looking Carnotaurus. And the final one is the T-Rex, and this one is such a bright, kind of vibrant, almost neon green, which is a really interesting choice of color for it. But again, when you get nice and close, the detail looks okay on this, but it almost seems like the larger the figures get, the less impressive the detail is, which you can see. It does look pretty decent. Maybe it's just the green kind of making it look somewhat awkward, but I feel like it would look better if it were probably smaller like the others were. Color-wise, we really only have that vibrant green and then a black that kind of patterns and stripes down through the body, but it does actually lead all the way out onto the tail, which is nice. We also have a darker tone around the eye, then a yellow eye with a black pupil, and surprisingly, the eye is painted nicely. It's the first figure that they, well, maybe, I think the Triceratops had decent painted eyes. So it's the second figure that they really cared about when it comes to the paintwork of the eyes. The teeth are painted and they do look a little bit better. Still a little bit sloppy, but a little better than the others. We have a red for the tongue, and that's it, just on the tongue and not even the entire way through the tongue. So clearly they didn't care at all as far as that goes. The T-Rex is obviously roaring. As we move through the body, we can see the arms sculpted nicely. The nails look okay as far as what we've got going on. There's another seam in the midsection, more glue, but the color is so bright on this figure, you almost don't even notice the glue in the midsection. And then you lead out, you've got a really nice curve to the tail leading along. You've got some decent muscle definition and everything for the legs of the dinosaur, some nice scoots moving down the toes. Again, there is no shortage of detail on these figures. They're just kind of interesting as far as the fact that they look sort of goofy and a little bit different than what you might expect. This one is warped as well. Well, it's not going to stand apparently at all, but still more impressive than I was ever expecting it to be. Nah, it's about the best I'm going to get, I guess. As far as a size goes, I'm definitely not going to sit here and measure all of them out. There's just too many figures in this set to kind of go ahead and do that. We'll just do one size comparison here with some of our standard figures, as we have Mr. Papo T-Rex back there. The Attack Pack Colovisaurus over here to the left. We've also got the Collect A Human Being right in the center, and then Robert Muldoon hanging out with his best friend, the Papo T-Rex over there. And you can see that a lot of the figures are not really that large. They're definitely a little smaller than like an Attack Pack or Danger Pack size range, you know, excluding the T-Rex, which is definitely a bit larger, closing in kind of on the Papo T-Rex as far as a size goes, but not quite there. It's definitely still a little bit smaller than Mr. Papo T-Rex. But overall, you can see that none of these figures are particularly large, but still they're not like quite minifigure size range. And just in case you wanted to see this awkward sort of map thing, I did open it up, which you can see it is actually quite huge. There's definitely a whole lot to it, but it's super silly. We actually have the target symbol over there, which is intriguing. But it's super silly, looks very generic, very childish, and not really something that would work well with these dinosaurs. But at the same time, I think if you're a little kid, you could probably find a way to have fun with it. So this Joyin Dinosaur Park Exploration set is interesting. It's definitely not a great set, but if you were looking for something again to repaint, it is a pretty good set for that reason. Like, you could definitely get some very cool, fairly decent looking figures out of these if you were to repaint them, because they absolutely sport definitely some of the most impressive fine detail I've ever found on a cheap set like this. The only thing is, this set was $20 when I bought it, but it was also 50% off. I think the usual price is about $40, so it's not really worth it then, but if you can grab it for $20, I would say it's definitely worth it just to repaint. But overall, the dinosaurs look pretty cool. Obviously, none of them are what I would consider accurate interpretations of the dinosaurs they are meant to represent. Not a single one in this set would qualify for that. The closest might be the Brachiosaurus, but even that's not quite there. But overall, they still have some pretty interesting appearances to them, kind of exaggerated, very stylized, but still really highly detailed. The paint apps of all of them are pretty poor. Like, they don't really look very good. There's not much to them. And I think, it's because this is a fairly cheap set that's just crammed with different figures from Joyin, who is a company that isn't, known for high quality figures. It's to be expected that the paint apps wouldn't be super impressive for what they are. Again, they're not that great, but they're not that terrible. And, if you were buying this for a kid, they're not going to care what the paint apps look like, so they'll have fun with it either way. But if you're like an adult collector like me that usually wants a little more from their dinosaur figures, I would definitely have appreciated better paint applications on these, at least a little more care, because like the eyes and teeth and everything are just super sloppy on almost all of them. But it still could be, again, a lot worse. At least they sort of put forth a little effort. There's a lot included in the set as well. Again, especially if you get it for the $20 price tag, you have a lot of dinosaurs that you get, as well as that really ridiculous Dino Park map thingamajigger, and you've got a pretty cool cage you can put them in, as well as a bunch of trees to kind of create a diorama and everything and help maybe with a display. So not the greatest set in the world, no doubt about that, but still kind of fun. So if you are interested, I will include a link in the description to where I grab mine from Amazon.com. So make sure you check that link, grab it if you want it, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.